Hello, and welcome back to the archive.
I want you to imagine something. Feel the desert heat on your skin. Hear the distant, melodic call to prayer echoing through the alleys. And then, a whisper, a sound from thousands of years in the past. A breath from a world of powerful deities and elaborate death rituals. Can a city truly escape its past?
Especially a city like Cairo, built on the foundations of an empire that perfected the art of immortality.
For centuries, we've been fascinated by ancient Egypt, but we often see it as sealed behind museum glass. But what if it isn't? What if the veil between our world and theirs is thinner than we think? Today, we journey into the heart of modern Cairo to investigate the uncanny stories of mummified whispers and spectral encounters that continue to haunt Egypt's timeless capital. I have a question for you. What ancient civilization fascinates you the most? And what spirits do you believe might still linger from it? Let me know in the comments below. If you're ready to explore the ghosts of the pharaohs, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell. Every like on this video tells me you want to uncover more of the world's most haunted histories. And as always, let me know what forgotten corners of the world you want me to explore next. Now, let us unseal the tomb and listen for the whispers. Cairo. The name itself conjures a duality. The thrum of 20 million souls, a symphony of car horns, vibrant markets, and the call to prayer, all layered upon a silence thousands of years deep.
It is a city of impossible contrasts, where skyscrapers of glass and steel throw shadows over thousand-year-old mosques, which themselves were built with stone quarried from pharaonic temples.
This is Cairo, the victorious, a metropolis that has swallowed its own history time and time again. But in Egypt, the past is never truly digested. It lingers. It waits. Our journey begins not with the monumental pyramids of Giza, icons of ancient power so familiar they have almost lost their mystique, but in the chaotic, living heart of the city itself. Do the spirits of those who lived and died under the rule of Akhenaten or Ramesses II still walk these streets? Does a 300-year-old soul recognize the world that has grown over its tomb? This is not a question of fantasy, but one that emerges directly from the foundational beliefs of the people who built this land. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end, but a transition. A dangerous journey that, if disturbed, could have consequences for the living. Their ghost stories were not campfire tales. They were theological warnings. And some say those warnings are still being issued today. Presentation of problem or challenge. The veil between worlds. Ancient beliefs. To understand the whispers of modern Cairo, we must first understand the ancient language of the soul. The ancient Egyptians did not believe in a single, simple ghost. They believed the spiritual self was a complex entity composed of several parts, three of which are crucial to our story: the Ka, the Ba, and the Akh. The Ka was the life force, a spiritual twin born with every human, which needed sustenance even after death. This is why tombs were filled with offerings of food and drink. A starved Ka could become a dangerous, hungry spirit, resentful of the living. The Ba was the individual's personality, their essence. Depicted as a human-headed bird, the Ba could travel between the tomb and the world of the living, visiting its old haunts. It was the part of the soul that could recognize and interact with family, but it had to return to the mummified body. Each night, if the body was destroyed, the Ba would be lost, becoming aimless and potentially malevolent wanderer. Finally, there was the Akh, the transfigured, immortal spirit of the deceased who had successfully passed the judgment of the gods. This was the goal: to become an Akh, a shining one, who could dwell with the gods in the field of reeds, mummification, the elaborate tombs, the potent spells of the Book of the Dead, all of this was a sophisticated spiritual technology designed
to ensure the car was fed. The bar had a home, and the individual could successfully transform into an cage.
But what happens when this technology fails?
What if a ritual is performed incorrectly?
What if a person is cursed, their name erased, their journey to the afterlife deliberately sabotaged? This is where the true horror lies. A spirit denied its place as an AKH becomes a Mutu. A dead one, a restless, dangerous ghost trapped between worlds. A tear in the veil. This brings us to the Egyptian Museum, a treasure house of golden kings and sacred artifacts.
In late 2023, during a routine inventory of a storage depot in Saqqara, a previously uncatalogued sarcophagus was unearthed. It was not royal.
It was modest by pharaonic standards, carved from dark schist, and belonged to
a woman from the late New Kingdom. Her name, inscribed in a single stark cartouche, was Enni Behemet, which translates to the Mistress of Silence. The tomb was devoid of the usual protective spells.
Instead, the hieroglyph spoke of a curse, of a voice swallowed by the sand and a memory condemned to the great void.
It is with the arrival of Enni Behemet's sarcophagus at the museum for restoration that the whispers truly began. Amira El-Masri is a brilliant young antiquities restorer, a woman whose hands are as steady as the millennia of history she works to
preserve. Her world is one of science and tangible fact, carbon dating, chemical analysis, careful documentation.
She did not believe in curses. For her, the story of Enni Behemet was a historical tragedy, not a supernatural threat.
The sarcophagus was assigned to her, placed in a quiet, climate-controlled wing of the museum. Away from the public eye, the first incident occurred on a Tuesday, a day like any other.
Amira was meticulously cleaning a section of the sarcophagus lid, the air filled with the familiar, sterile hum of the environmental controls.
Then the sound began to change.
It didn't stop. It thinned.
The deep, resonant hum of the machinery became a tinny, high-pitched whine, as if the very substance of the sound was being drained away.
Amira paused, listening.
The usual muffled sounds of Cairo's traffic from outside the thick walls faded into nothing.
An oppressive, absolute silence descended upon the room, so profound it felt like a physical pressure against her eardrums. It
was in this vacuum of sound that she felt the cold, not the controlled chill of the air conditioning, but a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to emanate directly from the dark stone of the sarcophagus.
It clung to her, raising goosebumps on
her arms, and then the snow began. Not snow as we know it, but a fine white powder, impossibly cold, began to seep from the seams of the sarcophagus lid.
It wasn't sand. It was crystalline, like natron that's used in the mummification process. But it glittered
in the sterile light and drifted to the floor, melting into nothing. As the magical dust swirled in the silent air, Amira felt it an overwhelming sense of melancholic loss, a sorrow so deep it felt ancient.
It wasn't her own emotion. It was an invasive presence in her mind, a memory of being forgotten. She stumbled back, knocking over a tray of instruments. The clang of metal on the tiled floor was deafening, shattering the unnatural silence.
And just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The hum of the machinery returned to its normal pitch. The cold
receded. The dust was gone.
Shaken, Amira rationalized it away, a momentary power fluctuation, a trick of the light, stress.
But she couldn't rationalize the feeling of a memory that was not her own, a whisper of a woman condemned to silence, who had just
found a way to be heard. The veil between worlds, torn by a forgotten priestess, was now hanging open in her workshop.
The incident in the restoration wing left Amira deeply unsettled, a scientist forced to confront a phenomenon that defied her every principle. She tried to bury the experience under a mountain of work, focusing on the physical properties of the sarcophagus, its age, its composition.
But the feeling of that invasive sorrow, that stolen memory, lingered like a phantom limb. The haunting, however, was no longer content to remain within the climate-controlled confines of the museum. It followed her home. Amira lived in a modern apartment overlooking the ancient, labyrinthine heart of Islamic Cairo.
Her refuge was the Khan Khalili, the sprawling bazaar that has been the city's commercial and social core for over 600 years. It was a place of sensory overload, a whirlwind of fragrant spices, gleaming metalwork, vibrant textiles, and the constant, cheerful haggling of merchants.
For Amira, it was an anchor to the present, a place where the weight of the pharaohs felt
distant. But now, N.E.B. Hemet's silence followed her there. One evening, seeking solace, Amira walked through the market's narrow, crowded alleys.
The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows, and the magical, almost imperceptible snow-like dust seemed to catch the light of the lanterns being lit. She stopped at a familiar spice shop, though air thick with the scent of cumin and saffron. As the merchant weighed her purchase, it happened again. The rich tapestry of sound, the chatter, the music, the distant traffic began to unravel.
The boisterous laughter of a nearby group of men faded into silence mid-chuckle. The clatter
of a dropped tray of tea glasses became a soundless pantomime.
The world was muted. In the ensuing vacuum, Amira saw him, a young boy, no older than 7, standing by a cart of dates. He was crying, his small body shaking with sobs, but no sound came from his open mouth. His mother, her back turned for just a moment, hadn't noticed.
Amira felt a sudden, sharp pang in her chest, not of sympathy, but of recognition. This was the same profound, bottomless sorrow she had felt in the museum, but this time it was being projected onto a living person. The boy wasn't just sad, he was experiencing an echo of N.E.B. Hemet's eternal loneliness. Then came the cold, and the spectral snow, a personal flurry that swirled only around the crying child.
Amira watched in horror as a thin wisp of what looked like steam or smoke rose from the boy's head and was drawn towards the sky, dissipating into nothing. As it vanished, the boy's silent crying stopped. His face went slack, his expression becoming strangely blank, as if he had forgotten what he was crying about. He simply turned and tugged on his mother's sleeve. His moment of intense emotion completely erased at that same instant. The world's sound crashed back in. The laughter of the men, the shattering of glass, the music from a nearby theatre, all returned at once. The spell was broken. Amira now understood the true nature of N.E.B. Hemet's curse. She was the mistress of silence, a spirit condemned to have no memory and no voice. To sustain her ghostly existence, she was not just haunting, she was feeding. She was drawn to moments of intense emotion in the living, creating a pocket of silence to isolate her prey. Then she would steal the memory of that emotion, consuming the sorrow or the joy to fuel her own spectral form, leaving her victim feeling empty and inexplicably blank. She was a psychic vampire, a thief of memories. Terrified, Amira knew she could no longer handle this alone. The scientific method was useless against a ghost that had feelings. She needed someone who understood the old ways, someone who knew the language of curses and spirits, not as history, but as a living, dangerous reality. She needed to find Yusuf. Exploration Development Part 3.
The keeper of forgotten lore, Yasser al-Mazri, was a legend in the hidden corners of Cairo. To tourists, he was the proprietor of a dusty, unassuming bookshop tucked away in a forgotten alley. But to those who knew, he was a keeper of lore, a man whose lineage traced back to the scribes and priests who had once read the stars and interpreted the will of the gods. His shop was less a business and more an archive of the city's esoteric soul, filled with crumbling Coptic texts, Sufi mystical treatises, and, if you knew how to ask, transcriptions of papyri that the official museums deemed too superstitious to display. Amira found him sitting in a pool of late afternoon sun, a cup of mint tea in his hand, looking as ancient and permanent as the city itself. When she told him her story of the sarcophagus, the silence, the cold snow, the memory thief and the Khan, he did not laugh. He did not dismiss her. He simply nodded slowly, his ancient eyes filled with a grave understanding. You have unsealed a hemet, a sorrow-eater, he said, his voice a low rasp. N.E.B. Hemet. I know the name. It is not in the king lists. It is in the cursed tablets. He led her into the back of his shop, a room even more cluttered and ancient than the front. From a locked chest, he retrieved a bundle of fragile documents, not papyrus, but copies made on paper centuries ago. He unrolled one, its surface covered in a script that was a strange mix of late hieratic and early Coptic. The legend of N.E.B. Hemet is a cautionary tale, Yusuf explained, his finger tracing the faded lines. She was a priestess in the temple of a minor god of silence, a deity whose name is now lost. She was said to possess a beautiful voice, one that could soothe the pharaoh himself. But she fell in love with a foreign general, an enemy of the state. She used her position, her access to the palace, to pass secrets to him, believing their love could stop a war. As Yusuf spoke, the story unfolded. N.E.B. Hemet was discovered. Her betrayal was seen not just as treason, but as a profound blasphemy, using the gift of a silent god to speak secrets. The pharaoh, enraged, devised a punishment to fit the crime. He would not just kill her, he would annihilate her for all eternity. They did not simply execute her, Yusuf continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. They performed the ritual of unmaking. They bound her calf so it could never receive offerings. They cursed her bar to be forever trapped with her mummy. And most cruelly, they magically erased her name and the memory of her from the minds of all who knew her. She was condemned to an eternity of silence and forgetfulness, a void in history. The curse dictates that for her to endure, she must consume the strong memories of others, replacing her own stolen past with theirs. Each memory she eats is a moment of relief from the crushing void of her own non-existence. Amira felt a chill that had nothing to do with the supernatural. This was the cold, hard cruelty of ancient justice. She looked at the sarcophagus in her mind's eye, no longer as a scientific specimen, but as the eternal prison of a heartbroken woman. The magical snow, you see, Yusuf said, pointing to a glyph on the text. It is the symbol of her temple. It represents the silence of the god. Where it falls, the world is muted, and she can feed. The curse says she will continue this until her name is spoken with love, and her memory is willingly given back to her. Suddenly, the problem had a shape, a history, and most terrifyingly, a solution that sounded like pure myth. They couldn't fight N.E.B. Hemet. They couldn't exorcise her. To save Cairo from her sorrow plague, and to save the spirit herself, they had to do the impossible. They had to restore the memory of a woman erased from time and offer it back to her with forgiveness. They had to complete the afterlife journey that was so cruelly denied to her 3,000 years ago. The restoration wing of the Egyptian Museum had become a pocket dimension, a space unstuck from time where the rules of the ancient underworld held sway.
The only light came from the swirling, spectral snow and the terrifying, beautiful form
of Behemoth, who hovered above her sarcophagus like a goddess of sorrow.
Around her, a chaotic vortex of stolen memories swirled, the silent scream of a frightened child, the phantom taste of a lover's first kiss, the ghost of a shared joke between old friends.
This was her sustenance, the emotional tapestry she had woven to shield herself from the eternal void of her own non-existence. Her eyes, burning with 3 millennia of rage and loneliness, fixed on a mirror, and Yusuf, his voice steady despite the supernatural storm, began the ritual. He did not chant a spell of banishment, but one of invitation. He spoke of the journey to the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, and the judgment before Osiris. He lit incense, the sacred scent of Kaifi filling the frigid air, an aroma intended to
calm the spirits of the dead. Oh, you who was made silent, listen. Yusuf intoned, his words resonating with an ancient power.
Your path was broken, your name erased.
We are not here to bind you, but to free you. Behemoth's form flickered with fury.
A wave of pure psychic despair washed over them, a feeling of being utterly alone and forgotten. It was a crippling force, but Amira stood firm.
She knew this was a test.
Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, holding the small, framed photograph of her and her grandmother. Behemoth, Amira said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the spectral noise.
Your memory was stolen from you, but memory is a gift. It is love. It is what makes us who we are. She held up the photograph.
This is a memory of my grandmother.
It is one of my most precious. I give it to you,
freely, not for you to consume, but for you to hold.
A reminder that love exists. She placed the
photograph gently on the sarcophagus lid.
A brilliant, warm light erupted from the simple frame, pushing back against the cold.
The swirling vortex of stolen memories faltered, the phantom screams and laughter quieting for a moment. Behemoth's ethereal form ceased its violent flickering.
She stared at the image of pure, uncomplicated love, her expression shifting from
rage to utter confusion. It was in this moment of hesitation that Yusuf made his move.
He stepped to the antique scale he had placed on the floor, a replica of the one used by Anubis to weigh the heart of the deceased against the feather of Mart, the goddess of truth and justice. Your heart was never weighed, Behemoth, Yusuf declared.
Your journey was halted.
Let your judgment be completed now. As he spoke, a faint, glowing sphere of light, the spectral heart of the priestess, manifested on the empty pan of the scale.
At the same time, the stolen memories, now freed from her control, coalesced.
They did not attack.
Instead, they swirled into the other pan, on top of the feather. All the pain, joy, fear, and love she had stolen now served as a testament to her existence, her heart against her deeds. The scales trembled, teetering violently.
For a moment, it seemed the weight of the stolen emotions would condemn her.
It is not the weight of the memories that matters, Amira whispered, realizing the final piece of the puzzle.
It is the choice you make now. She looked directly at the spirit.
Let them go. Forgive those who cursed you. Find your own peace with a final, mournful cry that was, for the first time, audible, a sound of heartbreak and release that echoed with the weight of ages. Behemoth made her choice.
She raised her ghostly hands, and the vortex of stolen memories dissolved, each one flying out of the room like a tiny glowing bird, returning to its rightful owner across the city of Cairo.
As the weight of her stolen deeds lifted from the scale, Her spectral heart rose, becoming lighter than the feather of Mart. The scales stepped decisively in her favor. The transformation was instantaneous. The furious, cold spirit of the Muta dissolved, replaced by a radiant, peaceful light. The form of Enibi Hemet solidified for a final moment. No longer a terrifying spectre, but the serene image of a beautiful priestess. She looked at a mirror and smiled, a gesture of pure, silent gratitude. The bar of Enibi Hemet, the human-headed bird, emerged from the light, no longer tethered to its tomb. It circled the room once before flying upwards, passing through the solid ceiling of the museum as if it were water, finally free to begin its journey to the field of reeds. The magical snow ceased to fall. The oppressive cold vanished, replaced by the gentle, warm air of a Cairo night. The room was still. The haunting was over. Conclusion summary. The enduring echo in the days that followed, Cairo returned to normal. Or rather, it returned to a new normal. The night watchman at the museum woke up with a headache and no memory of the last hour. The boy in the Khan El Khalili suddenly remembered why he had been crying and was comforted by his mother. Across the city, countless people felt a fleeting sense of déjà vu, a brief, intense emotion that they couldn't quite place, as their stolen moments returned to them. Amira and Yusuf never spoke of the full details of that night to anyone else. The official report stated that the strange phenomena surrounding the sarcophagus were likely caused by a combination of infrasound from the ventilation systems and psychological suggestion. The sarcophagus of Enibi Hemet, now just a silent, beautiful artifact of dark stone, was eventually moved to a quiet, permanent exhibit. The label beside it was simple, giving her name and title. But Amira had added a single, unofficial line to the description. A priestess whose journey was long delayed. The story of the mummified whispers serves as a powerful testament to the enduring power of ancient beliefs. It demonstrates that the Egyptian relationship with the afterlife was so profound, so deeply woven into the fabric of their world, that its echoes can still create ripples in ours. The ghosts of Cairo are not just random spectres. They are fragments of a complex spiritual system, manifestations of what happens when that system is broken. They are the car seeking sustenance, the bar lost from its tomb, or, like Enibi Hemet, a soul denied its very identity, forced to patch the void with the emotions of the living. This journey into the heart of haunted Cairo reminds us that history is not just in books or behind glass. It is a living, breathing presence that shapes the world we see today. The stories a culture tells about death reveal everything about how they chose to live. So, look around your own city. What ancient beliefs lie buried beneath the pavement? What forgotten gods or spirits might still be tied to the land you walk on? Every culture has its own relationship with the afterlife, its own unique ghost born from its deepest hopes and fears. Explore them, learn them, understand them. Be why, listening for the whispers of the past, we do more than just uncover ghost stories. We connect with the profound, unbroken chain of human experience. We learn that while empires fall and languages die, the fundamental questions of life, death, and what comes next will continue to haunt us forever. The peace that had settled over Cairo following the release of Enibi Hemet's spirit was, like the calm surface of the Nile, a placid facade over deep, ancient currents. Amira El-Masri had returned to her life of science and reason, but she could no longer ignore the world that hummed just beneath the threshold of her senses. The whispers had quieted, but she had learned their language, and she knew the silence was temporary. The desert, after all, is never truly still. The call came on. A searingly hot afternoon, the kind of day when the sun bleaches all color from the sky. It was Yusuf, his voice on the phone lacking its usual calm. replaced by an urgency that made the fine hairs on Amira's arms stand up. A Kamsin has unveiled a new tooth in the old lion's jaw, he said, foregoing pleasantries. The Kamsin,
Scorching, sand-laden desert wind had blown for 2 days straight, reshaping the dunes west of the city. In its wake, a local Bedouin tribe, whose camp now sat precariously on the edge of the newly scoured landscape, had discovered something. An entrance, a dark wound in the earth that had not been there a week ago. The tribe is led by an old friend of mine, Sheikh Omar, Yusuf explained. He says the wind no longer sounds like wind. It whispers his people's names. Last night, 2 of his best young men followed the whispers into the desert, seeking the source. They have not returned. The old fear, the cold dread that was so different from the desert heat, coiled in Amira's stomach. This was not a sorrow-eater like any behemoth. This was something predatory. This was a hunter presentation of problem or challenge. The tomb of the fallen Meji Amira joined Yusuf and a small official team from the Ministry of Antiquities. They travelled to the edge of the city, where the concrete gave way to the endless sea of sand. The Bedouin camp was a tense, quiet place. The usual hospitality was strained, replaced by fearful glances towards the newly revealed tomb entrance, a dark gash in the side of a large rock outcropping. Sheikh Omar, a man whose face was a roadmap of desert wisdom, greeted them with a grave nod. The sand moves with anger, he told them. It builds walls where there were none. It chokes the wells. It calls to the weak-willed. This is the work of a malevolent jinn, an afrit of the storm, while the ministry team set up their equipment, focused on the archaeological value of the find. Amira and Yusuf examined the entrance. The hieroglyphs around the doorway were crude, hastily carved, and weathered by centuries of buried existence. But the name was clear. Natemean, the strong and steadfast. Beneath the name was his title, Meji. The Meji were the elite police of the new kingdom, nomadic desert trackers enlisted by the pharaohs for their unparalleled knowledge of the harsh landscape. They were the guardians of the necropolises, the protectors of the trade routes, the masters of the desert. To find a Meji tomb was rare. To find one like this, isolated and so crudely marked, was unheard of. As they deciphered the inscriptions, a story of disgrace emerged. Natemean had been a celebrated captain of the desert patrol, but he was accused of a terrible crime, leading a wealthy merchant caravan, which he was assigned to protect, into a deliberately engineered sandstorm. The caravan, its guards, and its riches were swallowed by the desert, never to be seen again. Natemean was convicted of treachery and murder. His punishment was to be denied a proper burial in the Valley of the Kings. Instead, he was interred here, in the heart of the desert. He had mastered and betrayed, his spirit cursed to be forever. Bound to the wind and the sand he had weaponized. The curse doesn't just bind him, Yusuf murmured, pointing to a specific, sinister glyph. It fuses him with the storm. It states his power will not reside in his body, but in the heart of a sand devil. He is not a ghost who haunts the desert. He is the desert's anger, as if on cue. A gust of wind kicked up, unnaturally hot. It swirled around the tomb entrance, and for a moment, the fine sand coalesced into a fleeting, man-like shape. A voice, dry and rasping like sand scouring stone, whispered a single name on the wind. Omar. The sheikh stumbled back, his face paling. The whisper was not just a sound. It was a psychic law, promising a drink to a man dying of thirst, a safe path to one who is lost. Natemean was a shepherd of the last, guiding souls not to safety, but to oblivion, exploration, development. The desert's illusions, the 2 missing Bedouin men were a priority. Against the ministry's protocols, Sheikh Omar's son,
a brave young man named Khalid, insisted on leading a search party, and Amira, feeling a sense of responsibility, refused to stay behind. Yasf, too old for the trek, remained at the camp, promising to search his texts for a way to counter the curse. Venturing into the desert in Natmin's shadow was a terrifying lesson in misdirection. The landscape, which should have been familiar to Khalid, seemed to shift and change. Dunes that should have been to their right appeared on their left. The sun seemed to hang in the sky, unmoving. Their GPS devices flickered and failed, the screens showing nothing but swirling static. Natmin was not just a ghost. He was a master strategist, using the entire desert as his board. Hours into their search, as dehydration and fatigue began to set in, the illusion started. Amira saw a shimmering oasis on the horizon, complete with lush palm trees and sparkling blue water, a classic mirage. But it felt impossibly real. She could almost smell the wet earth. Khalid, however, saw something different. He saw the faint, flickering lights of the camp just over the next dune, a promise of safety. "There, it's the camp," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "No, Khalid, it's a trick," Amira yelled, grabbing his arm. "The camp is behind us." The true horror of Natmin's power was his ability to project a personalized law, a phantom hope tailored to each individual's deepest desire. He didn't chase his victims. He made them run towards their own doom. As they argued, a sand devil in miniature, swirling tornado of sand erupted from the ground nearby. Within its chaotic form, Amira saw him for a fleeting second, the spectral image of a tall, powerfully built man in the leather armor of a Meji, his face grim, his eyes burning with a cold, malevolent intelligence. The sand devil rushed towards them, not to attack, but to separate them. Its roar a cacophony of accusatory whispers. They were forced apart. Amira scrambled up a dune, losing sight of Khalid and the others. She was alone. The sun beat down, and the whispers intensified, now using her own voice, her own insecurities. "You are out of your depth, little scholar. You will die here, and your bones will be dust, forgotten like all the others." She fought against the panic, remembering the story of Enyi Hemet. These spirits fed on emotion. Fear was a feast for this desert predator. She focused on facts, on geology, on the angle of the sun. She tried to ground herself in logic. It was then she saw it. Not a grand illusion, but a small detail, a single line of footsteps, almost completely erased by the wind, leading towards a narrow canyon. They were fresh. They were the tracks of the missing men. Mustering her courage, she followed the tracks, the whispers of Natmin growing angrier, the wind lashing at her with stinging sand. She was ignoring his grand illusions, and it was infuriating him. The canyon walls rose around her, offering a brief respite from the sun. And there, at the end of the canyon, she found them. The two lost Bedouin, collapsed but alive, scratching weakly at the canyon wall. They were trying to dig, their eyes wide and crazed. "Water," one of them rasped, looking at the solid rock. "So thirsty." "I can hear the river." Natmin had not led them to an oasis. He had led them to a wall of stone and convinced them it was a wellspring. He was leaving them to exhaust themselves to death, digging for water that wasn't there. As Amira rushed to help them, the entrance to the canyon behind her collapsed. A wall of sand, impossibly solid, slid down, sealing her in with the dying men. The whispers ceased, replaced by a triumphant, echoing silence. The hunter had trapped his prey. Trapped. The silence in the canyon was more terrifying than the whispers had been. It was the silence of a sealed tomb, the silence of inevitability. Amira's heart hammered against her ribs. The two Bedouin men were barely conscious, their lives fading under the oppressive heat. Panic was a tangible thing, a predator stalking the edges of her mind. But then, the memory of Yasif's wisdom cut through the fear. Nate Mean was a master of illusion, a shepherd of the lost.
His power was in perception, in making you believe the lie.
To fight him, she had to find a truth he could not obscure. She knelt beside the delirious men, ignoring her own thirst. "There is no river here," she said, her voice firm, trying to anchor them to reality. She took a small archaeological pick from her belt and scraped it against the rock they had been clawing at. The sound was dry, solid, and real. "This is stone. The water is a lie." As she spoke, a low growl echoed through the canyon, the sound
of a predator being denied its slow kill.
The wind picked up inside the confined space, and sand began to scour the walls. And then, from the solid rock face, he emerged. Nate Mean's spectral form was not ethereal like any behemoth's. It was dense, powerful, made of compressed sand and shimmering heat haze. He was a desert mirage given life, tall and armored, his face a mask of grim authority. He did not look at a mirror as a monster would its prey, but as a warden would a prisoner. "You disrupt the sentence," his voice rasped, seeming to come from the scraping sand itself. They were judged. Their weakness condemned them. The desert claims the unworthy.
"You weren't their judge," a mirror shot back, standing to face him, her small pick held like a weapon.
"You were their guardian.
A Medjay protects."
You betrayed that oath. A flicker of something ancient pain. Rage crossed the spirit's sandy features. "I was betrayed. I was the guardian. I led the caravan on the safest path, the one known only to the Medjay. But there was a traitor among them.
One who signaled our enemies. They were waiting for us.
I fought. I was overwhelmed. My men were slaughtered." As he spoke, the walls of the canyon dissolved into a swirling, sandy vision of the past.
Amira saw it all. The brutal ambush under the desert sun. The chaos. The slaughter. She saw Nate Mean fighting with desperate fury, not to escape, but to protect the very merchants who now accused him. "My accuser," the ghost seethed, and the vision focused on a single, cowering merchant who had survived by hiding.
He was the traitor. He made a deal to save his own life. He returned to thieves and told them I had led the caravan into a trap.
They believed the lie of a rich man over the oath of a Medjay.
They erased my honor.
They cursed me to this eternity, to shepherd the weak and foolish to their doom, just as I was accused of doing. The truth hit Amira with the force of a physical
blow. Nate Mean was not a monster. He was a victim. His grief and rage twisted by a powerful curse into a weapon.
He was forced to endlessly reenact the crime he was falsely accused of.
He wasn't a predator. He was a prisoner, and the desert was his cell.
His illusions weren't just laws.
They were tests. He sought out the weak-willed and treacherous, the same kind of people who had condemned him, and visited upon them the judgment he himself had unjustly received. "Your sentence was unjust," Amira said, her voice now filled with empathy, not defiance.
"But these men are not your judges. They are just travelers, like you."
At that moment,
a new sound broke the stalemate.
A rhythmic chanting from outside the canyon. It was Yosf. He had found something in his texts. He couldn't break the curse, but he could challenge its authority. "Nate Mean, son of the desert, hear me."
Yosef's voice boomed, magically amplified.
"Your oath was to Mart, to truth. Your sentence was built on a lie. A Medjay spirit cannot be bound by falsehood. Reclaim your honor. Be the guardian, not the executioner." The ghost of the Medjay roared, torn between the power of his curse and the ancient truth of his calling. The canyon shook, sand pouring from the ceiling. He was losing control. Amira knew what she had to do. She turned her back on the raging spirit, an act of ultimate trust, and focused on the two dying men. She took out her canteen, which held the last of her water. Without hesitation, she poured the precious liquid onto a cloth and began to moisten the lips of the first man. "Imagery protects," she said softly, her back still to the ghost.
Imagery gives water to the thirsty.
Imagery guides the last back to safety. That is your truth. That is your honor. Reclaim it. The raging storm behind her ceased. The canyon fell silent. She risked a glance over her shoulder. Nate Mean stood bathed in a brilliant golden light. The sandy, spectral armor had been replaced by the image of immaculate, real leather and linen. The anger on his face was gone, replaced by a profound, weary peace.
He was no longer a monster made of sand.
He was the noble spirit of the captain he had once been. He gave Amira a slow, solemn nod of respect. Then he turned to the wall of sand blocking the canyon entrance. He raised his hand, and with a quiet sigh, the wall dissolved, collapsing into a soft, harmless dune. The path was open. Khalid and the others, guided by Yusuf's calls, found them just as the sun was setting. The two rescued men, though weak, would survive. Of the ghost of Nate Mean, there was no sign.
His curse, founded on a lie, had been broken by an act of truth and a reminder of his true duty. The official report from the Ministry of Antiquities would state that the tomb of the disgraced Nate Mean had been discovered, and that Amira
and the two Bedouin had been temporarily trapped by a minor sandslide before being rescued. The whispers on the wind were attributed to acoustic anomalies common in the desert, but the Bedouin knew the truth.
Sheikh Omar, his eyes filled with
gratitude, declared that the area was no longer cursed.
The angry Ifrit was gone.
In its place, he said, a guardian had returned. Travelers in that region in the years to come would tell strange stories, tales of being hopelessly lost, only for a sudden favorable wind to clear a path for them.
Of canteens mysteriously feeling a little fuller than before.
Of a fleeting
glimpse of a tall, noble figure silhouetted on a distant dune, watching over them, before vanishing into the heat haze. Amira and Yusuf understood.
Nate Mean's spirit was finally free, but he had chosen not to depart for the field of reeds. His honor and his duty were one and the same. He had resumed his eternal patrol, no longer a vengeful spectre, but a true Medji, once more a silent, unseen guardian, a benevolent whisper on the wind, forever protecting the innocent who travelled in his desert. This encounter with the sandstorm's whisper reveals another layer of the supernatural world. It teaches us that not all ghosts are born of sorrow or rage. Some are born of injustice.
They are the echoes of broken oaths and stolen honor, spirits trapped in a nightmare of false accusation. When you hear a local legend of a vengeful ghost or a territorial spirit, ask yourself, what is the real story?
Is it truly a monster, or is it a forgotten victim? A misunderstood guardian whose story has been twisted over time. The most terrifying legends sometimes hide the most tragic truths. Be wise seeking to understand the injustice behind the haunting.
We do more than solve a mystery.
We offer a voice to the voiceless, and in doing so, we might just calm a restless spirit. The whispers of the past are all around us.
It is up to us to learn how to listen, not just with our ears, but with our
hearts. The Nile.
To the ancient Egyptians, it was not merely a river.
It was the artery of the gods, the source of all life.
Its annual inundation, the Aked, was a time of rebirth, depositing the rich, black silt that fed an entire civilization.
They
worshipped it, measured their lives by it, and sang praises to Happy, its divine personification. But they also feared it. They knew that for all its life-giving grace, the river was also a vast, unknowable tomb.
For every life it sustained, there were those it claimed the boatman capsized in a sudden squall. the child who strayed too close to the reeds, the bodies of the drowned lost forever to its murky depths. They knew the Nile gave, but it also took dot in modern Egypt. The Nile has been tamed. The high dam at Aswan bridled the great flood, transforming the river into a predictable, manageable resource. The cycle of rebirth was replaced by the hum of hydroelectric turbines. Progress had conquered chaos, or so it seemed. South of Luxor, where the green banks meet the stark desert, a new, ambitious land reclamation project was underway. Massive pumping stations, marvels of modern engineering, began to draw water from the Nile on an unprecedented scale, altering the deep currents and disturbing the water table in ways no one had bothered to measure against the past. They were waking something up, something that had slept for centuries in the deep, black silt, something that did not appreciate the new rhythm of the river. Amir el-Masri was summoned to the king governorate, not as an expert on the supernatural, but as one of Egypt's leading organic material conservators. The call came from Dr. Fazi, the distraught director of a small provincial museum on the river's edge, a place that housed the modest but priceless finds from the surrounding region. The problem was impossible, a conservator's worst nightmare. Their collection of papyri and wooden artifacts was decomposing, not in the slow, relentless way of time, but with an aggressive, terrifying speed. A 300-year-old scribe's palette, perfectly preserved just last week, was now a warped, splintered piece of wood. A roll of papyrus containing delicate funerary texts had, overnight, turned into a black, pulpy sludge that smelled of river mud and decay. The museum's state-of-the-art climate control systems were functioning perfectly, yet the plague of rot spread from case to case. It was as if the very concept of preservation, the foundation of ancient Egyptian belief and Amira's entire career, was being undone. When Amira arrived, the atmosphere in the museum was heavy and oppressive. The air had a damp, clammy chill that no thermostat could explain, and it carried a faint, metallic scent like wet earth. The staff were lethargic and morose, their moods seeming to decay along with the artifacts. Amira's scientific analysis yielded nothing. There was no fungus, no bacterium, no chemical agent that could account for the speed of the decomposition. The process was fundamentally wrong. She watched in horrified fascination as a tiny splinter of wood under her microscope seemed to actively unravel, its cellular structure breaking down into a dark, wet dust before her eyes. The water damage was the most perplexing part. It didn't seem to come from humidity in the air, but from within the objects themselves, as if they were weeping themselves into oblivion that night, working late. She heard it for the first time. A faint, discordant sound, like a choir singing. Beautiful harmonies, but with each note just slightly off key, creating a deeply unsettling dissonance. It was a watery, echoing sound that seemed to have no source, yet it came from everywhere at once. And with the sound came a new phenomenon. A fine, dark grey dust, heavy and damp like silt, began to drift through the air, clinging to every surface. It was the same magical dust she had seen before, but its nature had changed. This was not the cold snow of a sorrow eater, nor the dry sand of a desert guardian. This was the dust of the riverbed, the dust of the drowned. Knowing she was far beyond the reach of science, she made the now familiar call. "Yes," she said, her voice low. "It's happening again. But it's not a ghost. It's a sickness of time itself." Yusuf arrived the next day, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a deep, furrowed gravity. As Amira described the impossible decay and the dissonant, watery music, his eyes widened with dawning horror. "This is not the work of a single spirit," he said, his voice barely a whisper. This is a manifestation of ISFVT, primal chaos.
It is the undoing of creation, the opposite of Mart.
You are not facing a ghost. You are facing a hole in the world. He
led a mirror to the museum's archives, to the local folklore section.
He pulled out a worn, leather-bound volume of regional tales collected by a French ethnographer in the 19th century.
He pointed to a chapter titled, "The Last Choir of Happy." The story was a local tragedy, now dismissed as myth. Near the site of the modern pumping station, there once stood a small temple dedicated to Happy, the god of the inundation.
Every year,
at the peak of the flood, a choir of young priests and priestesses would stand on a sacred causeway and sing hymns to the river, ensuring its retreat and the bounty of the black silt. But one year, centuries ago, a flash flood of unprecedented
violence had struck.
The causeway was destroyed, and the entire choir, 2 dozen strong, was swept into the raging river. Their bodies were never recovered, lost to the Nile's embrace, without a body for the bar to return to. Yusuf explained, and without proper funerary rites, they could not journey to the field of reeds. Their collective soul was torn apart, its fragments bound to the river itself.
They became a tragic echo, forever trapped in their final moments. The drought choir, their song of praise, became a dirge of despair. The new pumping station, Yusuf theorized, had disturbed their long-dormant resting place.
Its powerful vibrations and the alteration of the river's flow were a constant torment to the trapped spirits.
In their agony, their dirge was no longer just a sound.
It had become a supernatural force,
a song of unmaking. They were projecting their own state of decay onto the world around them, their eternal waterlogged torment causing everything they
touched to rot and dissolve. The haunting began to escalate.
It was no longer confined to the artifacts.
The beautiful, hand-carved wooden doors of the museum began to show dark, damp stains.
The floorboards felt soft and spongy underfoot.
The air grew thick with the smell of decay, and the dissonant chanting became a constant, maddening presence at the edge of hearing.
The staff's lethargy worsened into a deep, unshakable despair, their own life energy seemingly being siphoned
away, unraveled by the song of chaos. Amira, Dr. Farzi, and the remaining staff decided they had to work through the night to evacuate the most precious remaining artifacts. As twilight fell, the atmosphere in the museum became unbearable.
The
building itself seemed to groan in agony.
The dissonant, watery chanting grew louder, no longer at the edge of hearing, but seeming to emanate from the very walls, the very floor. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging them into a terrifying, damp darkness. A collective gasp went through the room, and then it began. From the floorboards, a dark, viscous liquid, thick and black like Nile silt, began to seep upwards, defying gravity. It poured around their feet, cold and foul-smelling. The drowned choir's song rose to a terrifying crescendo, a symphony of grief and chaos. The exit was blocked by the rising sludge. They were trapped inside a building that was being actively, supernaturally decomposed around them, dragged down into a symbolic, watery grave by the eternal sorrow of the choir. The darkness in the museum was absolute, a living entity thick with the smell of river mud and primal decay. The black sludge, a physical manifestation of the drowned choir's despair, rose steadily around their ankles, its touch unnaturally cold. The dissonant dirge echoed from every direction, a sound that frayed the nerves and unraveled the will to live. Panic began to set in, a palpable force that the choir seemed to feed on. Dr. Farzi, a man of science, was hyperventilating, while other staff members were frozen in terror. The museum was becoming their tomb. They are not trying to kill us. Yasser's voice cut through the chaos, steady and authoritative. They are trying to make us join them. in their sorrow,
in their decay.
Do not let your spirit unravel. Amira,
Her heart pounding, clung to his words.
she remembered Nate mean.
You don't fight the curse.
You answer the injustice.
The choir wasn't evil.
They were trapped in a broken ritual. Their song of creation twisted into a song of unmaking. To stop the chaos, they had to complete the song, the hymns, she said, her voice shaking but clear. Yes, the hymns they sang to Happy, to make the flood waters recede. Do you know them? I know the words, Yas replied, his silhouette barely visible in the gloom.
But words are not enough. A song must be sung. Their harmony was broken. It must be restored. The problem was immense. They couldn't possibly replicate the sound of a full temple choir. But as Amira looked around at her terrified colleagues, an idea, born of desperation and inspiration, struck her.
The pump station, she said suddenly.
It's the source of their torment.
Its rhythm is what's hurting them. We can't get to it, Amira, Dr. Farzi cried out.
We are trapped.
No, Amira countered, her mind racing. She took out her phone, its screen a lonely beacon in the oppressive dark. She pulled up a spectral analysis app she used for identifying vibrational damage in artifacts. The station's hum. It's a constant, low-frequency drone. It's the baseline of the new rhythm, the one causing all this chaos. We can't stop there. Song of chaos. But maybe we can give it harmony. It was a wild, almost insane idea.
She turned to the terrified staff. Listen to me.
I need you to hum, not just any note.
Hum with the museum, with the drone of the pumps you can feel through.
The floor. Find that note. Match it. They looked at her as if she were mad.
But Yusuf understood immediately.
She is right, he boomed.
They are the echo of our last choir. Give them a new one.
Sing with the river's new voice.
Sing Mart into the ISFET. Slowly, hesitantly, one of the younger staff members began to hum, a low, wavering note.
Another joined in, then another.
Amira found the note herself, the deep, resonant drone of the distant machinery that had become background noise.
She hummed it, loud and clear.
Yes, instead of humming, began to chant the ancient words of the hymn to Happy, his powerful voice, weaving through the simple, single note created by the others.
Hail to thee, O Happy, sprung from the earth, come to give life to Egypt, he who floods the fields that Oi has created, to give life to all who thirst.
When he overflows, the earth rejoices, every belly is in joy. At first, the dissonant, watery dirge of the choir fought against them, rising in volume, the black sludge climbing to their knees.
But then, something miraculous happened. The single, unified note of the new choir, Amira. Yes, and the museum staff began to act as an
anchor. It was a note of order, of human will imposed upon chaos. One by one, the ghostly, discordant voices of the drowned choir began to change.
They were drawn to the stable, harmonic drone.
A spectral soprano voice found the perfect third above their
note.
An alto found the fifth.
The dissonant, unsettling music began to resolve itself, correcting its pitch, locking into a harmony with the living. The song of chaos was being transformed, note by painful note, into a breathtakingly beautiful, unearthly chorale, a perfect harmonious blend of the ancient and the modern, the living and the dead jot. As the harmony swelled, the black sludge stopped
rising.
It shimmered and then began to recede, flowing back into the floorboards as if being drunk by the earth. The oppressive, damp cold vanished, replaced by a gentle warmth. The grey silt dust hanging in the air coalesced into glittering, golden motes of light that slowly faded. The lights in the museum flickered back on. The song reached its final, magnificent chord, holding for a long, perfect moment before fading into a peaceful silence. The haunting was over. The choir had finally finished its song. In the aftermath, the museum was miraculously unharmed. The artifacts that had been decomposing stopped their decay, the process of unmaking arrested. The wooden doors were solid again, the floors firm. The only evidence of the night's events was a thin layer of fine, dark silt on the floor and an inexplicable feeling of profound peace that now permeated the building. The land reclamation project continued, but with a new, unwritten addendum. The engineers at the pumping station reported strange, harmonious acoustics within the machinery, a ghost in the machine that actually seemed to improve its efficiency. The local people living near the river spoke of hearing a beautiful, faint music on the water at night, a sound that brought calm and promised good fortune. The drowned choir, its harmony restored and its duty completed, had become a benevolent presence, their eternal song now a blessing rather than a curse. They had accepted the river's new rhythm and made it their own, a mirror, and just knew the truth. They had not defeated a monster. They had healed a wound. They had proven that marked order, truth, cosmic balance was not a static state, but
an active, creative process.
It was the act of finding harmony in dissonance, of building order from chaos, of respecting the past while composing a song for the future. This encounter with the unraveling of the Nile teaches us a final, crucial
lesson.
Some spirits are not individuals, but collectives.
Some hauntings are not born of personal tragedy, but of communal loss and broken rituals. These are the ghosts of systems, the echoes of chaos that emerge when the fundamental balance between humanity and nature is callously disrupted. They are a reminder that progress without respect for the deep, ancient rhythms of the world is a dangerous hubris. Our world is full of its own dissonant drones, the hum of servers, the roar of traffic, the constant chatter of the digital age. We too live on a delicate balance, and we often forget the ancient songs that once kept the chaos at bay. Listen to the world around you. Listen to the places where nature and progress meet. Is there harmony, or is there a quiet dissonance? Every community has its own drowned choirs, its own stories of tragic loss tied to a specific place, its own broken rituals. Seek them out. Understand the balance that was lost taught me while learning to listen. We can find the note of order within the noise. We can, in our own small way, lend our voices to restoring the harmony. The world remembers its old songs. It is waiting for us to learn the music and sing along.